Welcome to episode 23 of the Thoughts with Lakshman podcast. I am Lakshman Sybil. I'm a junior at the Edgemont Junior Senior High School. I've been studying German for about a year and a half now. In my German course, I've learned about not only German language, but I've also been exposed to German cultural topics. And that's really what this podcast is focused on, German culture. The first 20 episodes are really specific on different unique topics with relating to German culture and German history. And I'm excited to say that we're going to be transitioning into a more general array of topics because I want to try and make comparisons between different countries now, specifically German. I can make comparisons to the US also, but that's really our goal here. This is the third episode, by the way, of a three-part series, 21, 22, and 23. This is episode 23. And I've been focusing on immigration um, in this series because in this three-episode series because it definitely relates to anthropology, and it also relates specifically to Germany, not just Germany though, but many countries. So in episode 21, and by the way, I highly recommend that you watch these three episodes. If you're listening to this one, I would recommend you listen to 21, then 22, then 23. But in 21, we spoke about general arguments made with immigration, and we tried to look at it from the other side because I've never really understood the anti-immigrant argument. Obviously, my parents are immigrants. I've always been I've always believed that immigrants were a good thing for each country. So I thought it was important that I try and, learn the other side, what other people are saying. So we kind of evaluated those arguments, and I wanted to see what made sense, what's legitimate, what concerns do people have. So we did that in that first episode. I also, refuted some things. I said my opinion on it, but it also relates culturally, with how people view their culture. Do they want many different cultures to combine and form one unique culture? Do they want, one uh, consistent and uniform culture? So it's an interesting topic. It's an interesting debate too, by the way. Um, but in the second episode of that, so the first episode is more general, more looking at the entire issue, looking at the arguments and thinking about philosophical questions when it comes to cultures. Um, the second episode, which is episode 22, talks about specific countries. That was pretty interesting. We spoke about Canada, Britain, Sweden was interesting. I didn't expect to see Sweden there, but they were there. Obviously, the U.S. We spent a lot of time in Europe, though. Poland. We looked at different polls, different studies, and we tried to understand it and what the possible solutions are. And in this episode, we're going to look specifically at Germany, because I think it's good to tie it back, and then we're going to start the first part of the episode by analyzing some evidence with Germany, and then we're going to try and wrap up the discussion before we move into another topic. But I thought, I enjoyed making these podcasts. I enjoyed doing the research, and I hope you guys enjoyed listening to it. So, just to start, Germany was often known for its history, with both world wars. It's not a really positive history. But in recent years, right-wing nationalism is on the rise in Germany again. Asylum seekers, according to a study, asylum seekers in Germany facing an increase in negative and hostile attitudes. This study, which was commissioned by the Friedrich Ebert Committee, really, that's a reputable source. And, um, you know, and the study, by the way, is pretty widespread. So, it can be trusted. And it's pretty telling, because it's actually from an area of Germany where there are more people who you would think would be supportive of immigrants. And it was a telling study. Even though it might not seem very telling, it is telling. Another study, by the way, so back to it. So right, we're talking about studies with this. Um, Another finding revealed that more than half of the people who they asked, 54%, had negative opinions about asylum seekers, and in areas where there were many asylum. This is really telling, by the way. In areas where there were many asylum seekers, so the population of asylum seekers was, most significant in these areas. Um, the study found that 2 out of 3, expressed an extremely negative opinion. This increase in hostility, toward refugees and asylum seekers in Germany has partially been fueled, by terrorist attacks in the country and elsewhere in Europe. But again, those are, really generalizations. You can't um, critique an entire race or religion for uh, individual instances that are completely different. Across Europe, for example, and as we were speaking, that this was mainly from the last episode, but just to reiterate it, you know, more than 900 hate crimes were recorded in and actually this is in Germany. So across Europe, this has been consistent, but in Germany, in cities in Germany, there are more than 900 hate crimes in 2018. That's pretty. That's a lot. You're seeing hate crimes, by the way, with the coronavirus against Asians in the U.S. Seeing more xenophobia, but 900 hate crimes is really something. Another study published by the Lives Center for European Economic Research showed that new asylum seekers were also 10 times more likely to be victims of hate crimes in the eastern areas of Germany than in the western areas of Germany. That's really interesting, by the way, because um, I think that has to do with the economic situation of the two regions. Western Germany is far better off than Eastern Germany, and we're going to spend some time talking about this. By the way, I already have a couple podcast episodes on East and West Germany because it's so crucial to understanding Germany. But even today, there's a big difference between the two. And a lot of people, and we were speaking about this in the first episode of this 3-part series, philosophical, trying to figure out what's going on, why. A lot of people blame, foreigners for their own economic struggles. And I think that's what you're seeing, by the way, what the study's saying, that they're 10 times more likely um, to be victims of hate crimes in East Germany compared to West Germany. We also know that East Germany is not doing very well. There are a lot more, poorer people in East Germany compared to West Germany, and it's not very. That's what I think. I truly believe that financial situation that people are in, their financial situation plays a big role in their attitudes towards immigrants. And I think sometimes, because there is truth, by the way, and we were looking at the economic arguments, and just to explain again, because this is really, a lot of people don't get this. It seems, very basic to think, okay, if we're working jobs, native Germans are working jobs, and immigrants come in, that means that our wages are going to go down because there are more people who are working. That makes sense economically, right? I mean, theoretically, that makes sense. But the problem with that is that immigrants are actually much more likely to create businesses and be entrepreneurs. And they actually, help develop and grow companies that employ many other Germans who, can earn high paying jobs, be successful, support their family. And that's thanks to, immigrants creating businesses, and they're much more likely to do that. So, for example, in the U.S., a right-wing economic uh, organization actually stated that immigrants are better for the native people and their financial situation because of the businesses they create. So it's another like ironic thing that people who are poorer blame immigrants when actually immigrants can help them. Um, but people always look for people to blame. It's a natural human tendency, and I think you're definitely seeing that right here. Um, so this economist, I was doing some research. Apparently, he's very well known in Germany. I don't know him very well. I don't know German economists very well, but his name is Martin Lang, and he said, um, and he basically reiterated, we are expecting to find more attacks against asylum seekers in the East than in the West. Other studies have found that already, and it was being reported in the newspapers. And so we have the feeling to analyze the data closely, and his, analysis reinforced this idea. Um, and by the way, this has now been reflected because Germany's a democracy, and the rise in anti-immigrant sentiment has reflected in policy changes. And in recent years, Germany has toughened, its immigration and asylum policies to really curb the influx of migrants and really deter others from, coming to Europe. These policies include, the right to deport failed asylum seekers and limit the number of family reunion visas, which is not, very good. You want, I can't imagine being part of one of those families. Germany also plans to cut refugee funding by 1/3 for 2020, which is going to make asylum seeking even more difficult, or securing asylum even more difficult. And, as a result of this rising anti-immigration, sentiment and attitudes, many refugees and asylum seekers are actually heading back home voluntarily. Between 2013 and 2017, Germany facilitated the return of actually over 140,000 migrants to their original country. And often these countries are third world countries where there's not much economic opportunity. Maybe there's not political, equality, political democracy, and it's not good. There's a reason Germany is an attractive country for many people to come to. There's opportunity. Um, if you work hard in Germany, you will succeed. It's a first world country. You can get a good education. Your health care is covered. And the fact that people are feeling uncomfortable with how they're being treated and they're actually choosing on their own, that the feelings against them, all the hatred that they're dealing with is actually so much that it's actually driving them to leave Germany and the opportunity they have in Germany and to actually go to their home country. And oftentimes there's a reason, immigrants come to other countries. The reason they're immigrants. Most people enjoy being home, but it's often out of necessity. And you know, um, those that's why a lot of people are sometimes upset with stuff like this. Authors of a new survey from the Friedrich Ebert Foundation have said that anti-immigration sentiment has become normal in Germany. Um, and under Angela Merkel, Germany was once a leading advocate for welcoming refugees in Germany. But recently, as I stated earlier, and this is really important, right-wing populist rhetoric in Germany has began to really gain traction. And now they have, a couple, I believe they did well. We were studying this in social studies last year, and we were studying German elections and how the rise of right-wing populism in Germany is, becoming a serious threat. And they're starting to, win seats in their Congress, which is, it's interesting. And I think we should also consider the history. The past 100 years for Germany and Germans, have really been exceptional. The fall of the Berlin Wall, um, you know, was a stunning historical event, really, but it also signaled the beginning of a process. Formal political unification of two German states, um, but a deeper and more fuller social and cultural transformation had only just begun. The end of the Cold War meant that Germany would once again be dealing with its past, confronting questions about identity and struggling to really define its relationships, role, and even responsibility in changing Europe. Um, actually, a famous West German philosopher, his name is Jürgen Habermas, he spoke of constitutional patriotism, or the idea that one is attached first and foremost to the liberal democratic order rather than to any ethnic or national idea of belonging or identity. That's very important, by the way, because this guy, this philosopher, I did some research on him. He was really admired in Germany. A lot of people really looked up to him. And when he spoke, people listened. Um, but, clearly they didn't really listen, though, because look what's happening now. Um, Germany had in the past had never really been considered a proper immigration country, depending on how you want to define that. Immigration had often been associated with, recruiting labor from abroad. And mainly, by the way, the largest immigrant group for many years in Germany was Turkish people. If you follow soccer, Mesut Ozil is Turkish. He's a Turkish immigrant, um, but he was German, and he actually had to retire from the German national team because after they lost, he retired from the racism that he dealt with from Germany. Um, but that's getting off track. It's just a specific example though of even to a superstar because he is really big. I believe he has like 30 million followers on Instagram. He's a really like massive person, and just because they lost, they weren't very nice to him. But I don't think we should I know this is really negative and it's portraying Germany really poorly, and a lot of this stuff has been positive to Germany, but I think it's important that we do acknowledge and we do become aware of what's going on. Um, at best. So just to, if you're wondering, um, speaking of, so let's talk. So the 2015 decision by German Chancellor Angela Merkel, to open Germany's borders really opened a crucial new German debate around questions of who are we. Fritz Stern, he's a historian. He wrote a autobiography titled The Five Germanys I Have Known." And for Stern, this was the Weimar Republic, the Third Reich, the Federal Republic, the German Democratic Republic, and the Germany of the post-Cold War period. Um, but according to this historian, Germany's starting to have a sixth. There's going to be a sixth Germany, and he might have to. He did an interview on it, and he said with the new immigration, he might have to write about a sixth Germany, and that Germany is with more immigrants, with more diversity. Um, but let's come back to something I said earlier: the rise of Germany's populist right. The Populist Alternative for Deutschland (AfD). It's a political party. It was established in 2013, and it really focused on economic issues and German fiscal sovereignty. Um, Germans, were, and by the way, in particular, compared to many people in the world, they really valued stability, um, and they had a longstanding skepticism of, unfettered free enterprise and stock market capitalism. Um, but then too, Germans had given up a decade earlier an important security blanket, which was their national currency. Um, but still, the AfD's base Um, Even though, it began as a free market, Eurosceptic party, critical of the euro, and, German bailouts of Southern European countries, um, it transitioned into, not just a policy that was very, very fiscally conservative, but also extremely socially conservative, especially with the refugee crisis and immigration. And that's probably what the party is most well known for. Um, you know, for example, and by the way, this rise of right wing populism in Germany isn't just exclusive to Germany. It's happening in Sweden also. It's also happening in France a little too. You have a lot of people in France too. So yeah, this is going to be extremely interesting to see where this plays out over time. And we're going to be able to watch this happen because something's going to happen serious in the next 10, 15 years. We're going to really see what happens here. Um, but, hopefully people can realize, people can understand what's going on. And, there people, this is a very interesting topic. This is a very complex topic. This topic affects a lot of people. Um, but I think it's important that we addressed it because it brings us to the more important question about culture and identity. You know, what does identity even mean, right? Well, an identity is basically, something that someone else can identify you with. So how can someone think of you? What do you want to be thought of as? Right? When you think of something, like when you think of Germany, for example, what do you think of? Well, I think of soccer. I think of classical architecture, classical, beautiful architecture. I think of um, German music, just the way, German pronunciation, with language and music and that sort of thing. And I also think of German theater. That's what I think of when I think of Germany. That's their identity right now. So having an identity is important, and what we've touched on, what people have cited is that they don't want to lose their identity. And people value having an identity. However, is that being threatened by, people who are seeking asylum from Syria or other countries? I think that's debatable. I think that every country has to make a decision, though. And people in the country, in democracies at least, the people in the country have to decide what their opinion is, how they're going to act. And Germany it's in a very interesting position right now, and we will see what happens in the future, like I said earlier. But this is very, very interesting because with identity, people don't realize the economic situation. People don't realize that enough, and they like to blame it. And they like, I mean, from a basic economic standpoint, it makes sense to think, oh, more immigrants means lower wages for us. Therefore, I'm against immigrants. At a very basic level, it makes sense, but it's just not true. Um, the evidence says that immigrants actually create businesses. So it's a very interesting discussion that each country has to have. And right now, it looks as if they're very anti-immigrant. And we'll see. And especially East Germany compared to West Germany is much, much more. Same thing in England, by the way. London voted against Brexit. The entire, mainly in the south of England, really was against Brexit. In the north, near Sunderland, Newcastle, you know they were for it. And directly, London is the wealthiest part. The south is wealthier than the north in England. So again, you're seeing that too. Um, but it's a very interesting, and I think also it brings up, the point that people like to blame others, and it's a natural human tendency, and it's happening here, and it's definitely happening here. But anyways, Thank you for listening to the podcast. I thought this was an interesting discussion. I hope you enjoy hearing my thoughts on issues like these. Immigration is something that really ties into cultures, and it's very important because this issue is going to become, it already is, at the forefront of our world in different countries. So it's definitely an important topic, crucial topic. And I'm glad that we had a meaningful discussion. We did a three-part series on this. So we basically have over an hour of content on this. And, for me, that's like many more hours of researching that goes into this. But thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. The podcast is available not only on Spotify, but also on Apple Podcast and YouTube. Moving forward, we're going to have the format's going to be similar like this. We're going to focus on cultural topics and we'll move forward. We might sprinkle in more specific German related topics, but we're always going to focus on major cultural topics and then compare different countries and then have an episode on specifically in Germany. Because Germany is, I really am interested in German culture, and that's the reason I created the podcast. But thank you for listening, and goodbye.